Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 298. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach, and I'm here with a first-timer to the podcast feed, but a long-time sponsored athlete from BJJ Mental Models. I've got Mandy Schneider here on the line. Mandy, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
I am also doing well. We first got connected a long time ago. I can't remember how it happened exactly, but someone had recommended that I reach out to you or follow you, and we've kind of become friends over the years, and you've been one of our sponsored athletes for a long time, but I will turn it over to you. Why don't you tell everyone your story, who you are, and what they might know about you?
I'm Mandy Schneider. I train out Soul Fighters here in Texas. Currently, I'm a purple belt, 20 years old. I compete in jiu-jitsu as much as I can. I also am a college student too, so that's fun. But I know we got connected a long time ago. With that, I started as a fan of the podcast. Always loved enjoying it. But that's pretty much it about me.
Awesome. Well, another thing that is probably important to bring up is you are on the mend. You just had a gnarly elbow injury. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm no stranger to injuries, especially during my purple belt career. I just had surgery almost 2.5 weeks ago. I had bursitis on my left elbow. Mine was chronic. Usually bursitis is cured with an ACE wrap, compression, or, you can get drained. Mine, however, it was completely destroyed, exploded, and it just was, he was like, we gotta take it out. So that's what we did. But I had it for really 2 years. I got it in a tournament from an armbar, and then eventually it went away, with regular treatment. And then it came back again a couple months later at another tournament. And after time went away, but I was training for Worlds, and it was in April. And I got in a normal armbar, tap, but it was so bad, it just blew up. And eventually, the pain was so bad, I knew, the only way to fix mine, I was I'm probably gonna need surgery. So I waited as long as I could to see my doctor. Probably not smart, but, I did end up going to see my doctor when it hurt enough. And surely enough, he was like, yeah, you're gonna need surgery for that. So
God, I've got a similar situation now. So this topic is actually quite timely. I've always been pretty lucky in my jiu-jitsu career. Yeah, I train pretty low intensity and pretty safely. And so I've never really had a terrible injury, but we're just diagnosing it now. But a few months ago, I think I tore my labrum in my shoulder, as I told you earlier. I'm trying to get that resolved. So timely conversation here for both of us. But what you had proposed as a topic of discussion is how to train around injuries. And I think this is a great conversation. Every jiu-jitsu athlete, regardless of whether you're a hobbyist or a pro, you are going to spend some time at some point nursing an injury of some sort. Maybe a serious one, maybe not, maybe just a sprain or something minor, but it happens to all of us. And especially when we're younger and more enthusiastic about jiu-jitsu, it's very easy to make things worse by overtraining or training when you're supposed to do rehab or just doing dumb stuff that re-aggravates the injury. So you had talked about this as a topic, how to train safely and smartly when you're dealing with an injury or recovery. I'd love to hear your thoughts on your personal experience here, what you're going through, because man, I saw those photos and that surgery looked gnarly.
Oh yeah, it was. It was the size of it. I basically had a tennis ball inside my elbow. And he had to remove 10 centimeters of my skin. So he basically also did plastic surgery. But yeah, no, it is something definitely I've learned over the past couple months here with this injury. But I really learned it for the first time before Nogi Worlds last year in 2023. I had also broken my wrist, and I was in a cast for 5 weeks total. And I only had 3 weeks before Nogi Worlds to train. So Then as I'm getting ready for Gi Worlds, this injury comes about, and it's way worse than, it was quite different because I could still train jiu-jitsu, but like I had to change how I was training jiu-jitsu versus when I fractured my wrist, I couldn't do jiu-jitsu at all. So I had to see how I could train without training jiu-jitsu. So I think the wrist injury, it helped me a lot because I had a goal. I was like, okay, if I do my recovery right, I keep my mind sharp, I keep my body sharp, I can still compete. I train year round, like the technique is there. All I have to do is keep myself in shape and keep my mind ready. And then I'll have 3 weeks to train actual jiu-jitsu before Worlds. So I think it's just kind of like what helped me was identifying goals with each injury. This time around is different because I got this injury and at least I could still train jiu-jitsu. It was a type of injury where I could put off surgery until after Gi Worlds. My doctor said, he just told me, he was like, you just gotta muscle through it and suck it up if you really want to compete. He's like, it's either that or surgery before. So it was a bit different because I was like, okay, I want to compete at Gi Worlds. So I was like, I've been dealing with this kind of injury for a while, so let me just see how I can train. I think one important thing, it's like whether you're a hobbyist or just someone who trains jiu-jitsu for fun, or if you're an athlete, is you always need to be careful of like, is this an injury I can train with, or like, do I need to just stop jiu-jitsu completely? Like, for instance, you're torn labrum. If you have a torn labrum, you can't train jiu-jitsu. So you kind of have to find ways to replace training jiu-jitsu, so to speak, but then have like that end goal in mind to help you like while you're recovering, if that makes sense, kind of.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. It's interesting that you bring up the distinction between hobbyists and pros. I think sometimes injuries can be harder for hobbyists to deal with because with a pro, yes, it sucks because this is your livelihood. You have goals. And some of those goals are on a schedule, but at least when you're a pro, you've got a plan and you've got something to work towards. As you brought up, if there's a tournament coming up, you can work out a plan to figure out how can we get there and recover in time, or if we can't, how can we adjust the plan and maybe hit our goals the next time around. But with hobbyists, often they're not working based around goals like that. Their only goal is usually, I want to get on the mats and do as much jiu-jitsu as I can because it's the most fun thing in my life. And if you take that away from me and all I'm doing during the day is being an accountant or whatever you do as a day job, that just seems untenable to a lot of people, that jiu-jitsu would be taken away from them. So I know that a lot of hobbyists actually struggle with this. I was one of those hobbyists when I was younger where I would try to train through every stupid injury because the idea of not having jiu-jitsu and just doing normal stuff in my life was just totally untenable to me. So I think you're right, though, that there's, of course, different scales of injuries. And one of the big things that you have to decide if you're going to approach injury recovery and training is, will training with this type of injury aggravate things and make it worse? Or is there a way that I can actually train around this relatively safely? And I'd love to maybe hear your thoughts on that. I'm sure it's not a science, but I know you've been through the ringer a few times, so you probably got some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I'm not gonna lie, like, that was me when I was a juvenile competing. I would train through the stupidest injuries. I would just be like, I just had it in me. I just can't stop training. Like, it was immature. I mean, I was a juvenile, so. But now, as I got older, the biggest thing I've learned in jiu-jitsu is longevity. It's like, this is what helps me mentally, too, is I think about it. You have to think of longevity. It's like, okay, I'm injured. In the long run, if I train, am I gonna mess or screw something up? Like, am I gonna be able to train the same when I'm older, or am I gonna slow down my progress? Versus where it's like, if I just take the couple months, depending how long you need, then I could come back and no issues. And I think that's where a lot of people mess up, is it's for a lot of things. People are too eager to just get back out there, but they don't think of their longevity in jiu-jitsu. And I kind of think of that too as like competition-wise. It's like you could lose a tournament, but you're like, oh man. But then you think of the long run. You're like, okay, long run, I still have like a bunch of other competitions ahead of my career to do. That's one of the biggest things I can say, is you have to figure out your goals like that. It's like you always want to put longevity over the moment, if that makes sense. Like for me, in my elbow surgery, it's a harder recovery than when I fractured my wrist. So I have to think of that I want to train for as long as I can in my life. So you want to slow down now take the time you need so that way you're not screwing up for the rest of your career. Same thing with hobbyists. It's like, they're like, oh man, all I want to do is go train after work, or I just want to train, get on the mats, even if I'm just getting beat up. It's like, no. Think of it. If you get back now and you get hurt again, you keep getting hurt, it's like you're never going to be able to, like when you're older in a couple years, you're still going to be fighting injury you could have fixed if you had just taken that time to really recover.
So let's talk about this, because there's this whole paradox around time frames where sometimes the things that you need to do in the short term to hit your goals are very different from the things that you might need to do in the long term. And you bring up a great example. You might think that overloading your training early on and trying to train through injuries is the best approach because you've got a relatively short shelf life as a competitive athlete. But on the other hand, if you do that, if you're not smart about your training, you can actually make things worse and wind up spending less time on the mats over the years than if you had just taken the time to do the rehab properly. But then you also hear stories of athletes who they've got an injury and they decide to go for it anyway. And, they might go into a tournament and they might even win. They might have an incredible showing despite being injured. And honestly, that decision might take years off of their competitive career. But that's a decision that every athlete has to weigh. It's a little bit different when you're a hobbyist, because when you're a hobbyist, your time on the mats is mostly about willpower. The hardest part about not being on the mats when you're a hobbyist is just that you want to be on the mats. It's not necessarily because your competitive career is going to be over in 5 years. It's because you just like to train jiu-jitsu. So the thing that I have found as someone who does this for fun is after I had my first big layoff, layoffs don't bug me anymore because I've been through them. I know I can take time off. I can come back. It's not the end of the world. But I'm guessing I would probably struggle a lot more if I were your age and I wanted to do jiu-jitsu as a full-time career, because I know a lot of athletes, they're constantly looking at the clock and they're saying, man, when I turn 30, a lot of those opportunities are going to dry up for me. I've only got so much time. So how do you as an athlete juggle those? Like the wisdom of knowing that you should train smart and intelligently to increase your longevity versus, hey, we might have a tournament that we need to do this month, and it's important enough to me that I'm willing to take a risk there. How do you juggle that?
Yeah, so I'll use both injuries I had were quite different experiences, I'd say, because the most recent one I need surgery for is, like I said, I could train while injured, and I made the decision to persevere because I knew I can't make it any worse. That was the thing with my injury. It couldn't get any worse. It was already as bad as it could get. The only thing that could get worse was an infection, and then I would need surgery right away. So that made the decision easy for me. It was like, okay, I can deal with pain. I've dealt with this pain. But when I had fractured my wrist, or I guess I broke it it was right after Nogi Pans, that one, I couldn't be on the mats at all. And my timeline was Nogi Worlds in the beginning of December. And I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't good. I didn't even know it was fractured. I fractured it in training. And it was just a freak accident. I wasn't even training hard. It's just one of those things that happens. And they put me in a cast for 2 weeks because he was like, we need to put you in a cast, see how it is. And they re-x-rayed it and they're like, no, you need to be in a cast for 3 more weeks. So that one, I had to do a big mindset shift. This is for any athlete. The timeline is okay, if you have a timeline for yourself, I think that makes recovery way easier because you have a goal in mind. If you're injured and you just kind of sit there and complain and be like, oh, I just want to train. I just, I wish I wasn't injured. That doesn't solve anything. You're just complaining at that point. So you have to set new goals for yourself. And what I learned when I had fractured my wrist is I told myself I'm still training for Nogi Worlds. That was the biggest mindset shift. If you have a tournament that you're aiming for and you're injured, then you have to tell yourself nope, I'm still in camp. And that's what I told myself. I said, I'm going to do everything. I focused on the things that I could do. I made a list to myself. I was like, okay, what are the things I can do with a fractured wrist while I'm in a cast? And what are the things I can't do? Really, the only thing I couldn't do on there was use my hand, and I couldn't train jiu-jitsu. So I was like, okay, from now on, I'm training for Nogi Worlds. How am I going to train? I started running every day. When I was supposed to train jiu-jitsu, while my teammates were training, I was running and running and running. And luckily for me, I still had my fingers and thumb in that cast. And so I lifted weights with my trainer. I stayed working with my nutritionist 100%. And it was really funny because I stuck with this mindset of anytime I didn't want to do a run, I was like, no, I have Nogi Worlds. This is my training. This is my jujitsu. I would watch jujitsu, of course, like I would study it, but I knew if I physically can stay conditioned, then, and mentally, which is the most important part, keep my mind sharp and motivated. Once this injury is healed, all I need is 3 weeks to prepare like actual trained jiu-jitsu. And so that was the biggest thing, was mentally telling yourself like, hey, you can still do it. You're an athlete. This is your goal. You're going to make it happen. So, I mean, that's what I did. It was oddly enough, it's once they took the cast off, I came back training no gi and I felt stronger and better than ever, which was crazy. And I got second at Nogi World. So I had like 3 weeks of actual jiu-jitsu training, but it's because if you can keep that mindset and tell yourself, keep your goals in mind, that's going to help you a lot. A lot of training with injuries, a lot of it's just mindset, honestly. That's really it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk to you about that in a bit, because I think when people talk about working through injuries, they're often talking about the physical side of things, but I'm increasingly coming to terms with the fact that the mental side might be almost as important, if not more important.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, and nobody talks about it either. Everyone talks about the physical side of rehab, but as someone who just took on an injury myself, I find the hardest part is the mental side of things. And I do want to pick your brain on that for a second. But before I do, something you talked about was keeping your mind sharp through training. So you brought up a few examples here that are very relevant. One is you pivoted your training to be less jiu-jitsu focused and more athletic focused on the things that you could still do. But another thing you brought up is that you kept your mind sharp. And I would love to explore what that means, how you did it, and what kind of results you found coming out of that practice.
Yeah, I agree with you. Honestly, the biggest thing when it comes to recovery is your mindset and keeping your mind sharp. One of the things I did that helped keep my mind sharp, especially during this injury, was obviously motivation for me is the biggest thing. If I don't have a reason, like if I don't have a why, then I'm not going to really be motivated to do much. That's just what works for me. But I think what will help is I outlined just identifying the things you can do and only really focus on those. Because if you start to get in the mindset of, oh, I'm injured, I can't train, like this sucks. Yeah, it sucks. Everyone knows that. No one wants to hear you complain about your injury. Like people feel bad for you, yes, but don't feel bad for yourself. That was my biggest thing, especially during this whole injury with my elbow. My teammates would see me every day. Every day I had people ask me, how's your arm? And it got to the point where, because I'd answer, I'd say, oh, it's not good. Like it's the same. And it got to the point when people would ask me every day in training, how's your arm? I just had to tell them, I was like, please stop asking me about my arm because it's not getting better. And so I'm doing what I can. And then no one asked me about my arm because I had to just stop focusing on it. Same thing with injury. If you know you're injured and you can train through the injury, you just have to find ways to keep yourself positive.
Well, I think it makes complete sense. And this is, again, something that I'm feeling myself very much right now. People are always asking me, how's the shoulder? But on one hand, it's very easy to engage with that because I want to talk about it. I want to complain. I want to say, well, it sucks, honestly. I can't do any of the stuff that I want to do. I want to go on for 10 minutes about how terrible it is. But at some point, then I'm just filling my head with negativity, and none of that is getting better. It's just making me more depressed, and it's distracting me from doing things that actually are more productive. So this is something I have noticed with a lot of high-level athletes like yourself, is their ability to gatekeep out that negativity when they get injured. Two examples that come to mind. The first time we ever had an actual guest on BJJ Mental Models was Oliver Taza. And at the time, he was in Vancouver. He was rehabbing from a bad knee injury. And I asked him, I talked to him about his knee, and I assumed he would just be really depressed and upset about it and angry even. But he wasn't at all. He was actually quite cheerful about it and said, well, you know what? It's an opportunity for me to go out and network and meet people like you, Steve, and build up my connections around the world and maybe do some seminars because maybe I can't compete, but you know what? One door closes, another door opens. And I thought, man, this guy's like 20 years old and he's way more mature than me. How's that even possible? And I recently heard the same thing from Dominika Obolenite. She's just coming back from a bad knee injury. You know, she had retired. For those who don't know, Dominika is a 10-time overall world champ, 4 times at black belt, the other 6 times running up to black belt. She got her black belt under Marcelo. In my mind, and I'm biased because she's a friend of the show, but I think she's one of the best women to ever do it in the sport. But she was planning to make a return to competition, and on her return path, got injured and tore her, I believe, her ACL. She was off for like almost a whole year. but she was a super good sport about it. She said that when it happened, she didn't get mad. She actually laughed because she said, like, of course this would happen to me. This is the universe's way of telling me, to do something else, to try something different. It's just, my plan's getting messed up. And so she focused instead on her art instead. For those who don't know, Dominique is an artist. She's built up an incredible business now as like an artist and a muralist for jiu-jitsu gyms. Man, if you want to have an amazing looking jiu-jitsu gym, get some custom art, talk to Dominica. She will make your gym look amazing. I mean, all of that happened because she tore her ACL, and that's something that would have broken a lot of athletes. So it really impresses me when people can just take something like that in stride and just keep going. That's, I think, one of the cool things about an athlete mindset that the rest of us could learn from.
Yeah, and that's why I've never liked it's no secret. That's just a mindset you have to have with a lot of things, especially injury. But for people who say like, oh, I'm only a hobbyist, you can still have that mindset with you have more time to focus with your family or friends or on work or just, find ways to make your recovery and rehab fun. But if you stay in a negative mindset, all you're going to be is, a negative Nelly, I guess. So you have to, of course, there's going to be times when you're just like, you know what, I just need to vent. This injury sucks, blah, 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 blah. Just get it out and then go back to having that mentality. Like, it is what it is. Let's see what I can do. But yeah, I mean, there's no secret. It's like, really, that's kind of the biggest thing is having and keeping a sharp, positive mindset rather than just being so pessimistic. Honestly, it's one thing people don't say is it's not really just being positive, but it's just being like realistic. Because in reality, you can still do a lot of things. You just have to figure out what those are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about this earlier about keeping your mind sharp. So how do you do that? Because sometimes, depending on the injury, it might be something you can train around. You can adapt your grappling so that it's still safe to do because you're not aggravating the part of your body that's injured and you can still let it recover. But some injuries, as you mentioned, are harder to do that for. So how does that work? I mean, are you studying instructionals? Is it more of a social thing? What does it look like to keep engaged with the sport and keep your mind sharp when you're not actually training, or at least not at full capacity?
Yeah, so with my elbow injury, I could still actually train. I had to monitor my intensity. I had to stop when my arm got hurt. You have to tell yourself not to train past hurting. But with my wrist, I couldn't train. So a lot of other athletes, I actually learned this from a lot of track athletes or distance running athletes. They do a lot of cross training. A lot of their training sometimes doesn't come from running their mileage. It comes from doing mileage on a bike or weightlifting or doing sprints, things like that. So I think mindset wise, to keep engaged with jiu-jitsu, it's like, yeah, you can, if that helps you, watch instructionals, be present. I'm a very visual person. So for me, going to the gym and just watching jiu-jitsu, that helps me a lot. And just kind of studying, watching more fights and matches, that keeps me mentally in the game and remembering the techniques and keeps me excited to come back and train. One thing that helped me was I couldn't train. So when you're you haven't been in the gym for a while, and maybe let's say you kind of took a break, you were injured, but you're just there's those days you're so excited to go train. Let that eagerness, that excitement build while you can't train. Don't think oh, I just want to be back. No, let the excitement build. And so that first day back in training, I remembered I was so excited because instead of being so focused on, oh, I can't train, I just was oh, I can't wait to train in a positive way. So there's many things when you can't train jiu-jitsu, yeah, it's going to suck. You're going to be missing it. But I think staying engaged with actual jiu-jitsu is definitely one thing you can do, watching instructionals, but then still keeping your body active. When I was fractured my wrist, when I would be on my runs and long runs, I would literally think of my teammates that would be training right now. If I got tired or didn't want to go on a run, I would be oh, but my teammates are killing each other right now. So I need to, I guess I need to go kill myself with this run, I guess, for that physical aspect. And then also I would just think about training while I'd be running. Maybe you can't run, but maybe you can go on long walks and think of jiu-jitsu in your mind too.
It is kind of weird how much of a difference that can make, at least for me. I think I mentioned this on an earlier episode. I've been meaning to find a jiu-jitsu / visualization expert. I would love to talk to someone who actually understands if there's any science behind this, because I can say from my personal experience, and again, I have no idea to know if this is something that other people go through. I don't know if this is actually true or if there's just placebo happening here. But when I took my first jiu-jitsu layoff. It was when my daughter was born, and I took a very long time off of jiu-jitsu. And honestly, at that point, I'd kind of just moved on. I took about a year and a half off of jiu-jitsu. I didn't even really think about jiu-jitsu at all during that time. I was fully committed to other aspects of my life. And when I came back to jiu-jitsu eventually, as I expected, it sucked at first, right? It took me a few months to kind of get the rust off and get back up to speed, which I expected. But then the pandemic happened. And again, I had to take another very long layoff, but this time it was different for me because instead of not thinking about jiu-jitsu at all, I actually focused really heavily on BJJ Mental Models and building that up. And so I was spending a lot of my time talking to amazing athletes like yourself and kind of learning about how they think. And even if I wasn't training, I was still talking to people about it and kind of getting their thoughts on it. I wasn't even watching instructionals or anything. I was just talking to people about jiu-jitsu and putting out this podcast. And when I came back after things kind of started opening up again, I thought, well, you know what? Last time I had this big long layoff, it took me a long time to get the rust off. So surely that's going to happen again. But I was shocked at the difference. I came back and it was like I hadn't missed a day. I didn't feel rusty at all. I mean, the cardio was maybe not where it should have been, but in terms of technique, I was able to grapple just the way I wanted to. And I think a big part of that was just that I was actually thinking about jiu-jitsu rather than kind of shelving that and moving on to other things in my life. So again, I would love to talk to someone who better understands the science, but at least for me, it really felt like keeping my mind engaged in the sport helped prevent me from getting rusty so I could just pick right back up where I left off.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I'm happy to hear that because I've had this similar experience of when I couldn't train, I fractured my wrist and I came back and I felt sharper than ever. But it's because, it's I was thinking about jiu-jitsu, but I think a lot of it too is just confidence because in reality, though jiu-jitsu is a skill you've built and developed and it's not something you're going to just lose in that kind of short amount of time, like a year and a half, like riding a bike. It's not like it, but it's, for the phrase, it's like to have the confidence, you're like, oh, you know what? I know what I'm doing. You're going to go back and train better. Whereas you're just so doubtful of yourself being like, oh, I haven't trained a year and a half. You know what? I probably suck. I'm not even going to try. But also I just think keeping your mind engaged, thinking about jiu-jitsu is one thing that can help you retain all that information as well, because you're still mentally engaged, your mind's engaged. And a lot of jiu-jitsu is using your mind while you're training. The mind-body connection in jiu-jitsu is insane. And that's why I love this sport so much. I'm studying psychology in school right now. And so for me, I am a nerd with the human brain. I love it. And so I love to learn these connections and learn the psychology behind being an athlete or training or just in general human life. So I think it's that placebo effect definitely plays a part in it.
Yeah, it was just a very interesting experience for sure. And I mean, the thing about layoffs too is after you've had one and you realize you can come back from it and you know what, it's going to be okay, it makes it a lot easier to go through it again in the future because it's not the end of the world. You take the time, you recover, you get better, and more opportunities will arise. And even if the injury is always nagging, there's going to be other things you can do to kind of pivot your journey and figure out a way to add value and to receive value and to, just have a good time in the sport. So I think the funny thing about layoffs is the first one you have is probably going to be the worst. I remember being a white belt. If I had a minor injury and I had to be off for a few days, it was devastating to me.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, but now, I've been doing this long enough. If something happens and I got to be off for 3 months, it's fine. Jiu-jitsu is still going to be there when I'm back. It's not the end of the world. So you kind of, I think, develop a better understanding of time frames as you train for a longer period of time.
Definitely. That's what I tell people. It's definitely something you learn over time and you're more comfortable with. It's for the surgery. It's I was more scared of actual surgery. Surgery was one of my worst fears. So when I was told you need surgery, I couldn't even think about it. I was like, you know what? Let me just focus on Gi Worlds and getting there, cutting weight and training. I was like, I don't even want to think about it. So it kind of relieved some pressure off me, and because I was just pretending you know what, I'm not injured, I'm not going to think about it until after. And then I got third at Gi Worlds and I was like, okay, you know what, I did for what I did, I reached my goal. I didn't win, but I reached a good goal. And then I was I competed that week, and then the next week I had to get surgery. And then I was kind of spiraling because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't train. And so I was going insane. And then I reminded myself, I was like, wait, I'm getting surgery. I'll be injured. I'll be out for a while, but I don't have any other tournaments planned. I don't have any other tournaments scheduled. My whole summer basically will just be dedicated to recovery and exploring new things and just kind of like letting my body heal, because in the long run, like you said, jiu-jitsu is not going anywhere. And I think that's, once you realize that, jiu-jitsu will always be there. And once you kind of internalize that, it helps you in the long run.
Amazing, amazing. Now, something else I want to get your thoughts on is the negative thought patterns that can happen when someone gets injured. I just saw a conversation a while ago. Someone posted this big, long diatribe because they'd just been injured. And it became clear that they really blamed the person who did it to them for injuring them, and in fact hated that person. And that's a very strong word, but it's kind of understandable, right? I mean, if you are rolling with someone, if the person is, you might perceive they're going too hard, maybe they never intended to, but if you blame them for injuring you and taking away what you love in life, it's very easy to hold negative emotions about that person. And I mean, that it's easier said than done. I think all of us know that you need to discard those emotions. The other person probably did not mean to hurt you, right? If they did, they're a fucking psychopath, but that's very rare. Most of the time it was just an honest accident. But when someone puts us on the shelf, especially if there's going to be a lot of money and time involved in getting back onto the mats, it's easy to harbor negative feelings towards the person who put you there. Have you ever dealt with that? And how do you overcome that? I mean, how do you release that negativity and maybe forgive the person and move on?
Yeah, I mean, I've dealt with that. My personality wise, I'm not a very, let's say, even if they did mean to do it to me, I probably, like, it's just my personality. I don't really like to stay mad at people. But I mean, let's say someone did it to you on purpose or not. It's like, either way, it doesn't change the fact that you're injured. So it's just negative emotions that you just don't need in your life. And, that's my whole point. It's like, if they did it to you on purpose, like, yeah, they're a psychopath. Like, they probably should get kicked out of the gym. Or if they did it to you on accident, like an honest mistake, it's like, okay, well, either way, you're still injured. But for both my injuries, they both obviously happened in training. The wrist injury, it was just a freak accident. I was literally on the guy's back, and he's not even heavy or that strong. It's just, it was in like the perfect, I don't know, position. He like did some wrist lock where all of a sudden I felt a small pressure on my wrist, and then we heard my wrist go snap, and I was like, that was an odd sound. He was like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. Let's keep going. We kept going and didn't even know my wrist was fractured for a few days. And then I went to the doctor because it was so painful, and he was like, yeah, it's pretty broken. And I was like, oh, okay. And immediately I texted my coach. I was like, hey, this happened. I was rolling with this person. And I was like, you know what? It was an honest mistake. I signed a waiver. Like, this is what I signed up for. He didn't mean to do it. But I did, have those emotions of like, well, this kind of sucks. Why would you even try to do this weird wrist lock on me? Why would you, it's like, you're a guy. Maybe you should have went easier with less pressure. So I had that moment of these thoughts of like blaming the other person. But then I had to like take a step back and be okay, it's not anyone's fault. These things happen. You know what you sign up for. When you sign up for jiu-jitsu, know what you're signing up for. Know the risk of injury is real. But also, it brings back to my biggest point of when I started focusing on like, I was trying to blame the other person, I noticed that I myself was getting more negative and finding an excuse to not do the things I want to do. It just kind of fueled those negative emotions. And that's why I say blaming someone else for your injury doesn't change the fact that you are injured. It might feel nice in the moment to be mad, but in the long run, that negativity is going to harm you, especially if you hold on to a lot of hatred. So, I mean, my best advice is just to forgive and move on, to focus on yourself.
I think that's great advice. When you dwell on something like an injury, as you said, to some extent, you're kind of giving yourself permission to be miserable and to make excuses for doing the things that could help you get better. I've definitely felt this where sometimes, and I think that for a lot of people this happens, where when something bad happens, it's kind of easy to internalize that, and suddenly it becomes an excuse for all of the things you want to do, but you can't. And then at some point you might realize, you know what, I actually probably could do a lot of the things I'm talking about here, but at this point it's now just become an excuse I'm using. And it's like you said, it's not healthy. Odds are the person who did it to you didn't mean to do it to you. Crazy stuff happens in jiu-jitsu, And even if they did mean to do it to you, like you said, frankly, they're a total psycho and they should be booted out of the gym and they don't deserve any more of your mental bandwidth after that. But that is extremely rare. Like I've seen a lot of injuries outside of competition itself, which is a very different thing because, of course, you're consenting to the other person trying to injure you. But in the training room, I mean, I've been doing this for 16 or so years. I have never once seen someone deliberately try to injure someone else. I've seen people maybe roll a bit too hard and in the moment they put on more pressure than they should have and they immediately regret it. I've seen fluke injuries, but I've never seen one person go in there with the intent to hurt another person because that is so anathema to what jiu-jitsu is all about. From a training perspective, that anyone who did that would probably be removed from the gym immediately, right? So it's important to remember that the other person probably feels almost as bad about the injury as you do.
Like, oh, I hope they don't feel bad. Like I showed up to training in like a full-on cast and they were like, oh my, like I could just see their face like, was that me? But I mean, yeah, so that's what you remember. It's like the other person, yeah, they probably feel really bad. Like there's no reason to guilt trip them. It won't fix anything.
Yeah. And it's, and the big thing, like you said, is it's not just about your relationship with that person, but carrying that kind of negativity impacts you. It's hard to escape negativity if you're feeding it yourself. So anyway, just something important to think about. But I mean, one thing I would love to know is what does the recovery plan look like here? So you talked about your coach. How involved do you get your coaches in your recovery plan? Are they still kind of working with you on a day-to-day level, or is all of that sort of on pause while you sort out the physical rehab aspect?
I think it just depends again on the injury, but when I fractured my wrist, I couldn't be in the gym training. So it was kind of more on pause. I was like, you know what, like I'll come and watch and I'll be back. But definitely it's like I communicate with my actual jiu-jitsu coaches, like the Timeframe will be back and that I'll come in and watch classes. But I mean, I still worked out, I just took care of my nutrition. But the recovery phase of it's like right now, it's like obviously I can't train. I just got out of a sling and I took a bandage off, got my stitches and stuff. But they're still involved to a point. But the thing is, your recovery is your own individual process. Jiu-jitsu coaches are your jiu-jitsu coaches. They aren't your doctors. They aren't you. Because some coaches will be like, no, be in the gym. Like, I don't care if you're injured or hurt. Well, you're my doctor. It's kind of like if you have a jiu-jitsu coach telling you to be in a gym, forcing you if you're injured or train, you might want to reconsider that gym because, again, they're not your doctor and they're not you. So for me, it's like just go to the gym the first 2 weeks. Today was my first day going back into my gym. I hadn't been there in 2 weeks because I just mentally wasn't feeling good and physically feeling good from my surgery. I was like, you know what? I don't want to go to the gym and just, when I'm feeling really bad. So I waited time to go in and see everybody. But I think that's the thing is if you can't train it, try to keep people involved. Try to reach out to your coaches to kind of see, to let them know like how you're doing and when you'll be back. But let's say when I was training for Gi Worlds with the injury, it was funny. I told my coach I needed surgery. Like I texted him. I was like, hey, my doctor just told me I need surgery. I don't know what to do. Should I wait or should I not wait? Like, should I wait to compete? And my coach, his response was, this is good. And I was like, what? And he was like, no, I think this is good. He's like, because you kind of thrive off injuries, Mandy. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, no, this helps you mentally stay focused on your goal. Like this makes you more determined. And he was like, it's up to you what you want to do. He's like, but I think you know what you want to do. And I was like, yeah. So I made the decision to put off surgery until the end because my goal was Gi Worlds. Now, if your goal is not Gi Worlds, I would just recommend have that surgery that you need. If your goal is to just train longevity or hobby, it's like take care of it now. But if your goal as a competitor is you're this close to a competition, talk to your coaches, get as much advice as you can because chances are your coaches have battled a lot more injuries than you. And so I do go to them for advice and I take everything into consideration, but at the end of the day, it comes down to you. But so I think that's kind of the role jiu-jitsu coaches can play and we had to obviously kind of make a new training plan. Everyone knew, don't attack that arm. If someone attacked the arm, I would just say stop. We would have people just do drills with me or specifics, certain things like that. You can still find ways to train with an injury. You just need to communicate with your teammates and coaches to help you train. I had to do a lot more specifics where I couldn't do certain positions. I couldn't really wrestle. I couldn't really put my elbow on the ground. So we had to modify a lot of things. But I think a lot of it just does come down to communication with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the signs of a great team and a great coach is that they will help you tailor your training to whatever is good for you in the moment. And having restrictions is not always a bad thing. There are many benefits to training with restrictions. In fact, that's a big part of modern training practice, is the clever use of restrictions to focus the area that you're training on. The one thing I found with this shoulder injury is there's not much that I can do jiu-jitsu wise because I can't move my arm much. Man, it's amazing how much you rely on being able to move your arm, let me tell you. But the one thing I can do is leg entanglements. I can do that quite easily. And so I've been trying to figure out a way to build a whole game to just focus on that, so I can maybe get the most out of this time and actually work on something, address a weakness and a deficiency in my knowledge. So like you said, turn this negative into a positive, turn it into an opportunity. I think that good coaches will do that for you.
Yeah, they definitely will. And they should, that's kind of what you want your team there to be there for.
Yeah. Now, another thing too that you talked about is that the decision to either compete through an injury or pause for rehab and recovery is a very personal, individual decision. Whatever the right decision is going to vary completely on the person. And I think it's important too to make sure that as an athlete, people have the tools to make the best decision possible, but also to understand that no one else has any business judging them for those decisions. Because people often want to know, what is the right answer if I get injured? Should I train through this or should I not? And there really is no right answer. It's your body. It's your goals. You should make an intelligent, informed decision based on what your goals are and based on the amount of risk you're willing to take on. My coach, Emily Kwok, I did a Q&A with her a while back, and she was talking about injuries. And one of the things that she mentioned is that in the run-up to one of the world championships that she won, she actually broke her foot. The way she described it is she said she refused to acknowledge the reality that her foot was broken. She just was having none of it. She would not even admit that her foot was broken. She just basically trained right through it like it was totally fine. And she won a world championship doing that. And what she said was, honestly, that probably wasn't the smartest decision. And it's not something that she would recommend for everyone. But for her, she felt it was the thing to do. I bring this up because, man, if you have to pull out due to injury, there's going to be people who shit talk you. Or if you try to compete through an injury, there's going to be people who shit talk you. You cannot really win as a high profile performance athlete. And something that's really inspired me is seeing that over the past few years, it's become more okay for athletes to make the right decision for themselves. For example, Brianna St. Marie pulled out of, I believe it was their world championship run recently, and it was because they just weren't in a state where they were able to do it. And I think that's amazing. I think that if you need the time and you think that that's going to be the best long-term decision for your career, you should totally do that. But again, it's not an easy thing, right? It's a very individual decision. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that and, how you navigate the public perception of this. In an ideal world, you shouldn't care, but I know it's hard not to care when people are talking about you online, right?
Oh yeah, no, I think honestly, one of the biggest things, that's one of the biggest struggles I think for a lot of athletes now is how big social media is right now. And so it's very easy to compare yourself or to get shit talked online for competing with an injury, being like, oh, you're setting a bad example, or pulling out because you're injured because they're like, oh, you still could have done it. It's like, no, you don't know what goes on behind someone's life. And, it's like, you don't know their goals. Yeah, maybe they could compete, but let's say they have a bigger tournament down the road. So if they get hurt now, then they can't do their other tournament they want to do. So it really is just up to your own personal goals. Your coach, your professor with Emily Kwok, she knew in that moment, this is the goal for her. And the thing, if you ask her, she doesn't regret it because she did the right thing for her in that moment, but she had her goal in mind. It's different for everybody. It's like for me with this injury, my goal was to compete at Worlds, and I knew I could do that. Should everyone train through injury? No. But if in the moment it's the right thing to do for you and you can safely do it without hopefully making it worse, it's like that's something you have to figure out. But ultimately, deep down, like your intuition, the right choice. But I think for athletes, it's so hard because I'm glad it's becoming less stigmatized for athletes to fight through the pain and push through it. Because in reality, if you look at athletes in other sports, if they're injured, they get pulled out by their coach. They get, it's a professional sport, football or track, if they get injured, they're pulled out. But in jiu-jitsu, people have a lot of freedom and a bit different mindset sometimes, and a little psychotic, I'd say. And they just think they have to train through the injury because so-and-so did. You don't need to. It's up to you, and it's just something you have to be confident in, is just knowing what's right for yourself and your goals. A lot of athletes can in the moment. It is inspiring when they can train through an injury and win the title they want to win or do well in a tournament, and that is inspiring. But it's also, you have to remember, they did what was right for them in the moment, you know? So it's really just kind of depends on your situation, your goals, and what it is you want to accomplish, I guess.
I gotta say, Mandy, if your elbow exploded and you still walked into Worlds and medaled and then walked right off the mats and got, had surgery right away and had them take 10 inches of skin off of your arm, you got to be one of the toughest people I've ever met. Man, what's next for you? I mean, because look, that amount of dedication and tenacity is incredible, but how are things looking now? What do you think the future looks like? What's the prognosis, and what's the next thing that you're going to be shooting for?
Yeah, no, that was rough. And I had to cut to rooster weight too during all of that. So I'm enjoying, not cutting weight. Right now, the prognosis is just get back on the mats when I can, hopefully end of July, beginning of August. But, just got done with the hard training camp. So, right now it's just enjoying recovery, focusing on myself and my health. And I'll be focused on a lot of school coming up, but no tournament scheduled right now until I'm probably back on the mats. So just not putting any stress on myself for that, really.
I think that's awesome. I mean, like you said, it's hard to do everything at once, and I think that your priorities are very clear here. But man, as always, I look forward to seeing what you do next. And of course, as you know, we will gladly be sponsoring you on that journey. But before we close this off, Mandy, any closing thoughts? Anything else you wanted to share or talk about? Or any advice for people who maybe they've been dealt a setback and they're really struggling with it physically and mentally? You've been through this a few times. Anything you'd want to give as closing thoughts to people to maybe help them on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's just have to remember, your life isn't over. It sucks in the moment, but realistically, you're going to get better. And focus, on yourself and be kind to yourself. That's one thing I struggle with, is I'm very hard on myself, very competitive with myself. So learn how to be kind with yourself when you have these kinds of setbacks to just help you get back stronger than ever.
Absolutely. I mean, again, not a jiu-jitsu pro, but every time in my career I have had a major setback that I thought was just going to derail me, looking back, it actually wound up being for the positive, because it shook things up and forced me to change what I was doing and reevaluate and find better methods and look for new opportunities. So it's interesting. If I look back on my career, every time something good happened to me, it was preceded almost immediately by something bad happening. And it was the bad thing that led me to find the good thing. So
why be excited for that growth that's going to come from it?
Yep. Awesome. Well, Mandy, if people want to follow you or ask you questions or contact you, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, I really just use Instagram. So my Instagram is Mandy N. Schneider. But yeah, I guess you can follow me there. Say hello.
Awesome. Well, I will put a link in the show notes, as I always do. I'll also put a link to all of our stuff. Everything we make lives at bjjmentalmodels.com. Getting very close to 300 episodes of the podcast, all completely free, all ad-free. We've also got our amazing newsletter closing in now on 11,000 subscribers. And of course, the big thing I would really appreciate if everyone try, if you're not already on there, is BJJ Mental Models Premium. That is ultimately how we fund this. And we definitely do our best to make it worth your while. Premium is, to the best of my knowledge, the biggest library in the world for jiu-jitsu audio courses on strategy, concepts, philosophy, mental models, of course, the thing that we're on the map for. If you are someone who is going through an injury, or if you're off the mats for some reason, I have always found audio to be an amazing way to keep your mind sharp, because even if you're not seeing these techniques visually, the beautiful thing about audio is you can fit it into your life in other quiet areas, while you're driving to work, while you're doing chores, while you're sitting in bed. And I've always felt that that does make a difference. It can keep you engaged mentally, even when you're not there physically. We've also got an amazing coaching team. If you want to get direct coaching from some of the best black belts in the world, that's one of the perks of being on premium in our coaching tier. And we've actually got some incredible professional premium exclusive podcasts you can only listen to as a member. One of my favorites is The Highest Levels, actually featuring Emily Kwok and Johannan. So if you want to listen to a world champion and her business partner at Princeton BJJ break down their journeys through the world of peak performance, that's another benefit of being on premium. So all of that's at bjjmentalmodels.com. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, as well as your contact info, Mandy. But thanks so much for coming by. I mean, it's been amazing watching your journey. Big fan of yours for a long time. And man, I'm looking forward to seeing you compete next, because you know we're going to be supporting you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Steve. It was great.
Most welcome, Mandy. Thanks so much. And thanks to the listeners as well. We'll talk to you next time. Take care.